Well, hello everybody. My name's David Blackmore. I'd like to thank Melanie for inviting me to take part in today's symposium, and also to meet new people. There's one or two people here who I do recognise, including Grace Lau, who had to put up with me about 9 years ago, I think, when she was my mentor when I was going through a bit of a unusual time post my degree, wondering where I was going with photography. Before I actually start, can you all hear me first? Yeah? Okay. I should apologise to people I was speaking to today if I seemed a bit distant, because I have a live workspace in Hackney Wick and it's in a warehouse. And they basically decided to have a warehouse party last night, so I was lying in bed at 5 o'clock this morning, listening to GABA, planning my escape to suburbia. So, yeah. Hopefully I'll be as compos mentis as possible. I'm a lecturer in photography, a visiting lecturer in photography at the University of Westminster. And I'm currently on a 2-year sabbatical from the University of Creative Arts, where I'm a senior lecturer in art and design. And at present, I'm doing a master's in fine art at the Slade. And I've been asked to talk about a body of work I made, started making, it's ongoing, in 2009, called Disposable. So I'm just going to run through that. Now, would you mind putting up the first video, please? So, in 2009, I was doing a fair bit of travelling. And I was in a kind of a weird state with photography. I became very disillusioned with photography. I felt it was very samey. I didn't feel it was I wasn't using it in an as expressive way as possible. A lot of the photography I had been making was quite formal, in the kind of Dusseldorf school, involved a lot of planning to gain access to different locations, and I wanted something that was a bit more freer, more autonomous. So I decided every time I went to a new place, I would buy a disposable camera and then shoot all the frames whilst I was there. Once all the frames were gone, I'd find a nice secluded place, usually where there's trees, and I'd dig a hole in the ground and I'd leave the camera there, cover it over, put an X on the tree, make a little map, so that if I ever got invited back to that place, I would be able to dig it up. So the rule is that I can't just go back there to dig the camera up. I have to be invited back, or there has to be another reason to go back. So the image you're looking at the moment was buried in Berlin for 18 months, I think, in 2011. I'm quite interested in the idea of the latent image. I'm assuming I'm preaching to the converted, so you all know what the latent image is. For those of you that don't, the latent image is a term that's used to describe when an image is exposed onto film, but it's invisible to the naked eye until it goes through a process of development and fixation. Then it can be viewed. So I left these latent images in various different locations. So the amount of time I'm away from each of the sites, including the environment they're in, the soil content, the weather type, all has an effect on the images whilst I'm gone, as well as the time. So they keep forming and erasing. I'm quite interested in memory, as everybody is, probably in photography. Specifically, I'm interested in organic human memory and the gaps that we have in our memory, and the things we choose to forget, and how our memory changes over the course of time as we view it through rose-tinted glasses. These images, I don't see them as single images, I see them as a continuous long image. So it's a continuous record of an experience. And the gaps in the imagery is as important as any of the content of the images. Because for me, that again conveys or connotes something about our memory and how it actually functions and works. If any of you are interested, there's quite an interesting book called Delete, The Virtue of Forgetting in the Digital Age, by a gentleman called Victor Meyer Skonenberg. And it's quite an interesting thesis on memory in the digital age and how we self-censor our histories but also makes the point that human beings have been able to survive because they've been able to forget, except human civilization is continually obsessed with remembering everything as much as possible. We'll just wait for that to finish. I should say that not all the, out of all, I think I've buried about 12 cameras in total in various different locations. I haven't been able to find all of them when I've gone back. I've got some images which I'll show you in a minute. But also, sometimes the film, when you develop it, bears no trace of the actual photograph, but rather bears the residue of the photographic process and the effect in the environment on the images as well. What attracts me to this is the materiality of the film, something you don't get with digital. And that's it. Thanks, Mel. So just to give you a bit of a background, this is the type of photography I left my BA with. It's very formal, 5:4, large format. It's from a body of work called Detox, which documented the use of blue UV lighting in public and semi-public spaces to deter intravenous drug use. It doesn't actually work, by the way, because heroin addicts can actually draw their veins onto their arms and therefore locate veins. But this is where I left my BA. This is when I became dissatisfied with photography because it was too formal, it was too lengthy. I wanted something that was more immediate. And Disposable is probably the most recent photographic body of work I've made. More recently, I've been making sculpture. So this is a tree branch brought back from Ireland. It's called a stick to beat yourself with. It was broken across my back, and then the interior flesh was gold leaf. It's just a detail. And there's another piece from last year called Jacked. Basically, I kept working on the park fence until either the park fence broke or the car jack broke, and the car jack broke. I remember when I was studying photography in Ireland, one of our lecturers gave us a nice little text by a gentleman called Paul Hill. I don't remember the entirety of it, but basically the main point of the text was that very often in photography, when you're working on something, you think you found something original, and then all of a sudden you come across somebody else's work who's done pretty much the same idea or similar to it, but done it a hell of a lot better. This is from a lady from the Royal College from 1997, Chino Uska, I think. Apologies for my pronunciation. And these were transparencies that she made of herself. I think they were self-portraits. And then she actually deep-fried them and presented them on light boxes. Stephen Gill. This is from his series Buried in Hackney Wick, where he photographed the area and then he buried the actual images in the ground for 24 hours, I think, and then he dug them up. And this is Catherine Yass, again similar process, so it's manipulating the actual analog material and subjecting each image to a similar treatment to the location or something about the location. So in this image you have the gas cylinders in the background near Andrews Lane Studios, and she actually burned the transparency for a number of seconds in gas before stopping the flames. So this is the first X I left on a tree in 2009 in Bratislava. At the time, I suppose in the back of my mind I was aware that the work was about the demise of analog photography, but also a demise of my engagement with photography as well. But I was very aware of the fact that I was actually documenting the marks I'd made so I could remember the spaces where I'd left the cameras with a digital camera, which I thought was quite interesting. This is the only one I've ever gone back to try and dig up and never been able to find. I'm pretty convinced that Danube has taken it away. So it might pop up somewhere else. This one's in Alice Holt in Hampshire. This one's in Dublin, my hometown. I've kind of moved between two different kind of points of view on this body of work. At times I feel that the images of the X's are the work, that it's a record of an action, and that it doesn't really matter whether there's a car park built on a site that I've buried a camera in, or whether I can find the actual camera again when I go back or not. But there is something quite seductive and I suppose a bit romantic about the images that are retrieved. So this is the location of the images you saw at the beginning in Berlin. And that's another location in Berlin. And that's in near Strawberry Fields in Central Park. And that is in Prague. And this one is in Leer in Belgium. And this one is in Colombo in Sri Lanka. And the last one I did actually was in Lisbon in Portugal. So what I often do, well what I always do, is I try and make some kind of rudimentary map so I can discover or rediscover where I'd left the camera upon being invited back. So this was just in the back of a football match ticket. Sometimes I use Google Maps or the aerial version of Google to record where I left the camera. And there's a long history of artists burying material and making work through that act. Burying ideas, leaving time capsules. For me it's about burying memories and letting time take over and morph and change those memories. And that's one of the cameras after I found it. So very often the landscape has started to take over the actual cameras. There's roots growing through the cameras, the cardboard housing has started to disintegrate, there's moisture inside it, the battery has started to corrode. But it's not plain sailing. Sometimes it takes me a while to actually find out where the camera is. Although I've developed a new strategy, and the new strategy involves leaving a stone on top of the camera so that I can just stick it through the soil. But I've had some interesting times. This is a kids' playground in Berlin, which I spent 2 hours digging up the ground. The police nearly got called. Thankfully my friend could speak German and resolved the situation. So the bag there on the right, that is one of the cameras retrieved. And this is actually the location in Sri Lanka where I buried the camera. A friend of mine is from Sri Lanka and he went back there about a year ago. And luckily enough, well, they built a footpath, but on the opposite side, so technically the camera is still there, so if I ever go I'll be able to dig it up. And this is one of, I think this was from Berlin. I think you're going to see some of the images from that in a moment. So you can see, I mean, roots are growing through the camera, it's starting to disintegrate. And they're quite nice artifacts, and I do collect soil when I retrieve these cameras as well. It's just an image of the film canister. Because in disposable cameras, instead of the film being wound back inside the canister, it's how does it work? Yeah, it's still exposed. I think. Something might be able to correct me on that. It's been a while since I convinced a lab to let me process one of their films because they're not too keen on it because apparently it messes the developer and the rest of the chemicals. Although Labyrinth and Roman Road are quite nice. Not just an image of one of the negatives. The negative, the one you saw at the beginning. So you can see that almost, in some places, almost all of the emulsion, all of the memories, all of the indexical relationship to reality has completely been removed. And these are just some details from the images you saw at the beginning. I don't know if you can see it, some people can't notice it, but there's a human head on the right hand side missing the nose. And what I find interesting about these is often the people who I go on holidays with, they're no longer part of my life now. So the kind of eroding of the film and yeah. But like some of the other speakers, one thing that kind of irritates me about it is that in order for me to print these continuous images to a certain size, I mean, as far as I know, I can't find a traditional printer that will do that, or have the space to do that, because they are about 30 meters long, if they're printed the right height. So they would be digital prints of some kind, which is unfortunate. If you wouldn't mind playing the second video, please. I hope you can make that out. This is an example, this is another film from Berlin actually. In the ground for the same length of time, but in a different location that had a different use. So the soil was subjected to different treatment over the course of time. So there's very little that remains of the image that you would associate with a photograph. Except for me, these images, the ones that come out like this, are more poignant because they completely erase the memory of that event, of that particular time period. And all that's left is the trace of the photographic process, which I find quite interesting. One other thing, there's a gentleman called D. Roderick, who wrote a book called The Virtual Life of Film, and in particular there's an essay that's called Lost in Translation. And given the subject matter of this symposium, I just think it's interesting to consider, well, it's an ontological question about the essence of digital photography, because technically digital photography doesn't share the same indexical relationship with reality that images exposed onto film do, because it's a physical trace. And then also in digital photography, the other thing to think about is that the images you get are mediated once already, because the light is transformed into zeros and ones, e.g. binary code, through the actual sensor. So it's one step removed already from reality. And I just think it's an interesting thing to contemplate, because does that mean that we have to come up with a new, has photography changed completely? Is photography the right word to be using in the digital age? And on that, I'll leave you. Thank you very much.